Fae tricked a man into banging his horse because he thought it would save a woman from a curse. Also, one particular Fae could write their magnum opus, which was a romance tragedy that later resulted in that horse becoming pregnant, giving us the very first Centaur. But that was only part one of the Centaur Origin story. Let's jump into some information from the mating manual because it discusses more than just how to bang a creature. We actually take time to break down the anatomy, why they have that anatomy, how that anatomy ends up affecting everything from dating culture all the way to their religions. The additional context that you need for this is all of this is taking place 10 years after the end of the Defiance War. The thing about the Defiance War, this is when the mortals of the Chaos Planes decided to break away from the control of the planar spirits that basically ruled over all of this land. And if you remember history, this is 6.6 Texases worth of landmass that was destroyed in this war by our tall, tatted up, dummy mommy orc named Lady Petals found in my Night of Slaughter series. The results of this war set the precedent for everything that we see today, including in the Devil's Deal, where they hate the Fae. So even if you worship the planar spirits, you could end up getting your body parts sold on the market as food, my guy. So the Fae and mortals both needed a little bit of break, a little bit of humor, a little bit of joy in their lives. So this Fae took this novel that they wrote to the Elder Fae, who absolutely loved it. Then the Elder Fae was like, you know what? The Great Fae needs to see this. Pretty much an owner of a grove. And they were like, we love this. We need part two. Part two. Fae was concerned because they thought this was going to be their magnum opus. But now their boss's boss is saying, you need to give me a part two. And you don't say no to a great Fae. So the Fae went to the Elder Fae and was like, I need more inspiration. What do you have for me? And the Elder Fae said, well, we know that the Centaur is not a viable race in terms of it cannot reproduce. And the fact that there's only one of them. So what they ended up coming up with is they needed to make a Centaur haven. They needed to tell an origin story for an entire race. And luckily enough, a great Fae typically has enough imbued power by the planar spirits to make a race viable. So the author Fae went and found a perfect farming village for the origins of the Centaurs. And so what they did is they decimated the land. They pulled the nutrients from the earth to ensure no crops would grow that season. The villagers had no clue what the hell was going on. All they knew is now they are poor, now they are starving, and if next season goes awry, the village is... So midway through next year, what happened is the Fae went up to the village and said, hey, we noticed you had some issues. We will make you a deal. If you take your young adult men, the strongest of the strong, and have them impregnate their horses, for every horse they impregnate will be another year that the fields will be viable and the harvest will be greater than the last. And so the villagers, not happy about this, but they're like, we need to live, we need to eat. They had their young men go out, bang the horses, and there were 100 centaurs born that were viable thanks to the Great Fae's power. And therefore, 100 years that village was going to have prosperous crops, each one greater yielding than the last. So you may be thinking, wow, that's kind of dark, kind of awful, but kind of funny. But it doesn't end there. We got one final part to the origin story because the Fae knew that the mortals, thanks to the war, were going to abuse the centaurs. So they had to make it where the centaurs would be protected. So what they did is they knew in a couple years, people would notice how yielding these crops were, that this village had normal output and now it's just busting. The villagers did love their centaur children. They treated them literally like their own children. They had them, they raised them, they were kids to them. But the neighboring village got word that their village wasn't doing so hot now, but this other village all of a sudden is doing great. And so they sent someone to investigate. And what they found was heresy to the highest level. There were Fae, half Fae, walking around, human horse hybrids. They had made a deal with the Fae. They knew it with their hearts. And so they took a raiding party, went and destroyed the village, killed the villagers, and started slaughtering the centaurs. But the Fae came in, saved all that they could, took them back to the groves, and ensured the children knew what the mortals had done to their home and what they were going to do to them. So ever since then, the centaurs were spread to the different groves to ensure the viability and survival of the race should one grove come under attack. And this legend and this story has been passed down time and time again. So that's why you don't typically find centaurs outside of the Fey groves and why they're so hostile to humanoids. It's been over 532 years since the creation of the viable centaur. Don't worry, we'll be going into even more detail thanks to the mating manual. If you'd like to support its creation, all you gotta do is grab a Ruby Gold sub or get an original character on one of the breeding teams by grabbing a diamond, and you also get to read my mangas for free digitally.